I do want to come to Congressman O'Rourke because I know this is personal to you. El Paso is your hometown. Some on this stage have suggested a voluntary buyback for guns in this country. You've gone further. You said, quote, Americans who own AR-15s and AK-47s will have to sell them to the government, all of them. You know the critics call this confiscation. Are you proposing taking away their guns, and how would this work?
I am. If it's a weapon that was designed to kill people on a battlefield, if the high impact, high velocity round, when it hits your body, shreds everything inside of your body because it was designed to do that so that you would bleed to death on a battlefield and not be able to get up and kill one of our soldiers. When we see that being used against children, and in Odessa, I met the mother of a 15-year-old girl who was shot by an AR-15, and that mother watched her bleed to death over the course of an hour because so many other people were shot by that AR-15 in Odessa and Midland. There weren't enough ambulances to get to them in time. Hell yes, we're gonna take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not gonna allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
Okay,
Hi, everyone. This is Nina Prevost. Welcome to the Trigger Warning 2A podcast. I know Antonia's not with me tonight. Unfortunately, she had kind of an incident with the with getting her oil changed. And I won't reveal everything that happened, but let's just say that the people who were doing her oil change left her car in a very dangerous condition, and she was not able to drive down tonight. But I'm still here. We wanted to make sure that we still provided you with content, even though I don't have my lovely sister here with me tonight. But thank you all so much for joining in. I have my producer Edgar here. He's going to be talking a little bit more tonight. If you want to introduce yourself real quick.
Hi, I'm Edgar.
Perfect. And as you all just saw, we were just going to start this episode off with a bang. That was a clip from the Democratic debates that happened a couple days ago. And that was Beto O'Rourke. And I'm not going to call him Beto. His name is Robert Francis. That was Robert Francis O'Rourke discussing his ideas regarding AR-15s and what he would do if he were president of the United States of America. And I wanted to show the whole clip because there's a couple things in that clip that I think are particularly alarming. And, Edgar, feel free to chime in at any point if you want. But I think first and foremost, the thing that is most alarming to me is the audience reaction, because the audience, gives thunderous applause to what Beto had to say. I'm not going to call him Beto. Darn it. I'm not going to do it. To what Robert Francis had to say. And what Robert Francis had to say was that he was going to take away our AR-15s, our AK-47s, all of this, anything that could be used on a battlefield or that would be used on a battlefield. But it reminded me, for those of you who are listening who might be Star Wars fans, it reminded me of that scene when Palpatine becomes the Emperor and Amidala essentially says, "So this is how liberty dies," to thunderous applause. And that, I think that was a very emblematic moment of that. Because in effect, we have an audience cheering for the destruction of their own rights. And I think that it's important to acknowledge as well that what they're cheering for in particular is the removal of weapons that could be used on a battlefield. And I think that is particularly interesting, right? Because we always hear from the people who want to take our guns away that weapons of war should never be, just in the hands of everyday people. But the thing is that weapons of war are precisely what the Second Amendment was meant to protect. And that's why so many of us who are Second Amendment advocates will talk about, our rifles as being protected by the Second Amendment. And let me explain what I mean by that. So we often hear criticism that you would never be able to fend off a government with the weapons that you have in your house. But at the same time, they're saying these are weapons of war and they don't belong in your home. And similarly, when we look at what's happening sometimes in the Middle East, there are relatively small, at least compared to the U.S. military, groups of people who are able to hold off the biggest military in the entire world with, they probably have some AKs. I bet there's some ARs up in there. There's a mix of these various rifles that are semi-automatic, but they're able to hold off the U.S. government with that. And they're admitting that they're weapons of war as well. And that's the whole thing. The whole Second Amendment is based on the idea that we have an inalienable right to defend ourselves against tyranny. And that is why the weapons of war in particular are the ones that are protected by the Second Amendment. And I think that it's important to acknowledge how powerful guns like AK-47s and AR-15s have been, especially with the ability for the people to have uprisings or have revolutions against tyrannical governments throughout the world. And I did want to ask Edgar about some of this because he knows a little bit more than me about the distinctions between these kinds of weapons and why people might be scared of them and all of that. And I was just hoping that you could illuminate us on, the nature of an AR-15, the nature of an AK-47, and why these weapons might be controversial.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go into the basics because obviously it's a pretty complex.
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah, it's a pretty complex thing, but essentially there's a difference in calibers. The AR-15, it's a 5.56, could also shoot a 2.23. AK-47 is 7.62 by 39. So you got a 30 caliber round with the AK-47, which versus the AR-15, which is essentially it's notoriously known for being a 22 on steroids.
Okay.
Same diameter as essentially a 22. I clean my 22 rifles with the same cleaning kit as I would with an AR-15.
Interesting.
Aesthetically, obviously, they're different. But that's kind of the basics of it. It's much more complex than that. We can get into impingement and the differences in gas systems and all that stuff, but it's slightly irrelevant and a little too nerdy for the conversation we're having right now. What I do want to talk about, though, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. Whatever you want to, Edgar.
That was actually the first time I watched the whole clip.
Oh, snap.
And
it's crazy, right?
It is. More so because he said he talked to somebody who watched somebody bleed out. Instead of talking about let's take objects away, I wonder why we're not encouraging medical attention or training in that aspect. Because a lot could have been done to prevent that bleeding out,
right,
in that particular circumstance. So it's kind of sadistic to a certain degree to be like, instead of getting medical training, we're just going to take a tool away from you that could have defended you. It's kind of gross.
Right, and I think it is really a disservice to that poor individual who did bleed out to be blaming the weapon instead of the fact that maybe they didn't get medical attention in time, or I don't know the surrounding circumstances of that incident, but just to assume that if we just take all of the weapons of war away off of the streets that individual would have lived or something is really a strange assumption to make. And I think it's kind of insulting it's obviously insulting to all of us law-abiding gun owners, but I also think it's insulting to the victim who, died in that instance. Yeah. And I guess I also wanted to ask, what would be a benefit of having like an AR-15, or like what's a selling point of having one, especially for something like home defense? Compared to just like a pistol or something at home.
Especially with the shorter AR-15s. Obviously, anytime you have a rifle, you're going to be much more accurate with it. So obviously, you get the advantages of simply just being accurate with that rifle.
And accuracy matters, especially if you're at night and you're. I don't know. All of that is important.
Absolutely. Now, me as an instructor, I don't. Everybody has their own opinion. Obviously, that's why I don't want to get into it too much.
Right.
But I would never recommend an AR-15 for home defense. I would stick with something smaller than that, but there are certain circumstances where an AR-15 for self-defense is practical. And obviously, if you want accuracy and you want power, you get an AR-15. Anytime you have a longer barrel, again, that's such a loaded thing because it's such a complex conversation.
Right.
But generally speaking, with a rifle, you're going to get accuracy, you're going to get power. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not always.
Those are nice things. I like having those things.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And do you think that people have these reactions to these weapons just because they look, I mean, I don't even like to say that they look scarier, because to me they actually don't look scarier. But, you know, some people want to say that looks like a weapon I'd see, you know, a soldier carry. And do you think that's why people have this response to it, even though the calibers aren't necessarily so much more powerful that, I don't know, that would warrant that kind of fear? Or am I just totally off on that?
No, I don't think you're completely off, but I mean, we also have to think like a politician.
Right.
And politicians love to tug at heartstrings. They love to target, I hate to say this, but low-hanging fruit, those with maybe not the highest of intellect. and I say this for both sides, by the way. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm saying this politicians in general, exactly, across the board. So it's easy to play on that emotion, that fear, that panic mode, and say that this particular item is somehow more scary than another one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think that we focus too much just on the objects anyway, with all of this.
Yeah.
But one interesting thing that I saw was that after Beto had that whole, in my opinion, it's a gaffe. Although I guess the audience liked it. But and after Robert Francis had that gaffe, AR-15 sales have skyrocketed across the country. So it was one of the best advertisements for AR-15 manufacturers and salesmen in recent memory.
Yeah. Well, there was Obama, but I don't think anybody's going to be Obama for a while.
Yeah, well, that was just crazy. So, but we don't have to focus on Robert Francis for too long, because I don't think that politicians deserve too much of my time. And
also, isn't he polling really, really low? So, like, it's almost irrelevant.
I forget. Maybe someone in the live chat can tell us where Robert Francis is polling. I think it was less than 3%, though. It was like 2 point something.
Yeah, pretty low.
And quite frankly, he is just such, I don't know, he's so plasticky. Like, he's kind of a weird person. I don't know. I don't see any charisma in that guy. I don't think that he's going to win, even if he hadn't said something that, you know, probably put off at least half of the country with that. Because there's a lot of Democrats that own guns. People would be surprised to learn.
And that demographic is growing as well.
Right, because a lot of them are scared of Trump. Yeah. So,
you know, and that's a perfect example of why you own a gun.
Right.
If you're afraid of tyrannical maniacs, like a lot of people say Trump is, then you own a gun. Mm-hmm. You don't get rid of it.
Yeah, you just keep it.
Or you buy more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is what I'm going to do.
Exactly.
So
Full Auto says on the chat, says, I heard 1 to 2%. I suppose we live in 2019. We could just Google it and see where he's polling.
I know. I was trying to be all, you know, not looking down at my phone yet. But I thought that they had to be at least at 2% to be eligible for the debates. So that's why I was saying that it must be 2% plus. But yeah, I think that I don't think that that's even necessarily a selling point with the Democratic Party, at least those that aren't, you know, so ideologically possessed that they think that Trump is Hitler while also wanting Trump to take all of their guns away, because there are some people who are like that.
Yeah.
And that
so
doesn't
as of
make
8
sense,
days ago, he's polling at 3%.
3%. That is still 3% more than he deserves. But I guess the next topic I had, do you have anything else on that one?
No, I'm good.
The next topic I had was, you know, we had the anniversary of 9/11 this last week, since we did our previous podcast. And, you know, obviously it's always kind of sad to have this holiday come up. I shouldn't call it a holiday. That was weird. I shouldn't have called it a holiday. But this day of remembrance for a tragedy that happened in our country, and really an act of terrorism, an act of violence, an act of war really against our country. And obviously there's a lot of kind of weird stuff around 9/11 too. There's people who have conspiracy theories about 9/11, and I think on the actual day of September 11th, especially on Twitter, it's just kind of a dumpster fire of people either grandstanding about, the U.S. military and how wonderful our military is and everything it's done, or, talking about the conspiracy theories about who might have been behind the attack. But one thing that I wanted to mention is just where I was. I think it's pretty crazy to think about this. I was in 7th grade when September 11th happened, and I'm 30 now. And we're still at war over this. It's been 18 years. And I remember when I first heard about it, my English teacher was playing some news on the radio. We didn't have the TV on or anything. And I kind of thought it was like a fake news story. But then when I got home, I saw that it really was, that had really happened today. And that was actually when I probably started to develop some of my kind of libertarian leanings, because it seemed like an awful quick turnaround between that happening and us being in another country, at war, in effect. And there's a lot of details about, the authorization of use of military force and whether or not that's still valid now, since it's been like 18 frickin' years. Do you have something you want to say?
No.
Oh, okay. Please interrupt me if you want.
No, it's weird to like look at you when I'm used to looking at you on the camera.
Oh, yeah.
On the screen over here.
Yeah. Well, you can look at me over there if you want. You don't have to look me in the eyes if it's too much.
It's too powerful.
Yeah. Windows to the soul, right? But I wanted to bring that up just because it's the longest war in U.S. history at this point. It's longer than the Civil War, longer than the Revolutionary War, longer than all of those wars that we should have learned about in school, but we didn't, like the Spanish-American War and stuff like that. And it's one where we didn't actually have a formal declaration from Congress. It was all based on the authorization of use of military force. We haven't had an actual formal declaration of war since World War II. And that's something that Ron Paul used to point out. And I just think it's something to remember, because our country has in effect been at war for most of my life, and it's primarily based on this event. And I think it's important for us to think about the amount of time we spent at war in that regard and what we've really accomplished. Have we managed to, actually do anything about terrorism throughout the world? It seems like terrorism has gotten worse. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I do think certainly we've seen an escalation of terrorism in Europe and other places throughout the world, mostly because our interventions are creating really dangerous situations in some of these countries, and gangs build, and at first it was Al-Qaeda, and now we kind of have this whole like ISIS situation. Although I haven't heard, have you heard anything about ISIS recently? I haven't heard much about them.
No.
I don't know where they've been.
And I wonder where Al-Qaeda went. Like,
right?
Why did they just drop off?
Or are they our allies now? Sorry, I'm joking, because obviously, the U.S. government has actually sent arms to moderate, quote-unquote, rebels
Weren't
abroad.
they supposed to meet with Trump a few days ago? And
Yeah, wasn't Trump supposed to? Yeah. I thought I saw something like that, but the news has gotten so crazy that I genuinely don't know if something is parody or if it's true anymore.
Especially from New York Times.
I know, and that's one thing. That was one of the things I had on my list I wanted to mention about how September 11th was covered, because the New York Times, I forget how they actually phrased the headline specifically, but they referenced it as if the airplanes were the cause of 9/11. That airplanes just flew into these buildings, and that's why we had this.
New York Times did it?
Yeah, they had to apologize and delete it. No, seriously, you should look it up.
That looks crazy.
Yeah, right? I saw that because I follow the New York Times on Twitter, so I actually saw it when it was before they deleted it and apologized. But it's one of those things where you can't erase history just by trying to talk about it differently. I mean, I was alive for that, okay? I know it was not just planes they didn't say it was malfunctioning or anything. It was just that the headline didn't make it clear that there was any kind of, terrorist attack that occurred, or that the planes had been hijacked and then flown into planes. It was like airplanes take aim at two towers, and we remember today, but I just think that we have to be honest about what actually happened that day, and it was an act of terrorism. And as many conspiracy theories as there are too, the planes that actually hit the two towers, we kind of know at least some information about what happened there, and we know that it was
Or do we?
Or do we? We partially know that one of Osama bin Laden's motives was to trigger the U.S. to start a war in the Middle East that would bankrupt us.
We've done a fantastic job at that.
Yeah, we basically ignored what he said and then ended up doing exactly what he wanted us to do. And that's what happened to Russia as well. People don't realize that Russia kind of went bankrupt fighting wars in the Middle East, sort of like we're doing right now.
In Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan specifically. Yeah. And I also think it's interesting how many times they've told us they're pulling troops out of Afghanistan, how many times they're pulling troops out of Iraq. But, my goodness, we still have troops in Germany.
Yeah.
So we are not the kind of country, unfortunately, that brings our troops home. But for me, I just think that we've wasted a lot of innocent lives, billions of dollars, and we've really achieved nothing. Like, we're kind of in the same place where we were when we started, and I think it's partially because it was an unwinnable goal. You can't just fight a war on terror like that. You don't have a defined enemy, you don't have a defined objective. And the soldiers or the military people I talk to always talk about their job as, I have an objective, I execute that objective, and that's my duty as a soldier. But the objective here is to eradicate like an idea, or eradicate those who might do us harm in any corner of the world. But that's not a defined enemy, and you can't really have a defined objective if your enemy is so ill-defined.
That's like us going after anybody online who talks stuff about us.
Yeah.
And doesn't like us.
Yeah, although people do that now.
Yeah, that's what I like.
It's crazy.
It's just yeah, there's a lot of people out there that do hate us online. Mm-hmm. Individually. I just seen the thing about Antonio being traded. But the point is, before I digress too much, the point is there's a lot of people who don't like us. Some have valid points, some really don't. But you can't go after all of them. It's silly for us, as supposedly the world's superpower, to go after little ants that don't really matter, that are insignificant.
And what I've always wondered is why our main goal hadn't been more to use like very small, very skilled like smaller groups of soldiers or Marines or whatever, and send out a squadron to go take out, to get Osama bin Laden, for example. Yeah. It's like, let's get the guy who planned this attack. Like, I understand that. I understand the desire to do that. And I think that we as Americans, would be in a just war situation to go after the person who actually, orchestrated that attack. But what you do is you go in, you find Osama bin Laden, you take care of him, and then you get out. You don't, overthrow Saddam Hussein in Iraq. So, there was all of that stuff. Everything with Iraq got mixed in with 9/11. And I feel like you can tell when you talk to people about that moment in history or how we ended up in Iraq, it all gets messed up. Like, they don't understand who was actually responsible for the attacks, even though everyone knows Osama bin Laden's name. And sorry, I know I got off on a little bit of a rant about that. I just think that we've gotten to a place where people don't even realize why we were there, and all the things that we did were so much more extreme than what we could have done, which would just be to go use a small elite team of really trained individuals to go take care of the people who actually orchestrated that attack and took it out. Gunn's
website says, Cold War missile bases in Germany, etc., were there to halt Soviet expansion. No. Yeah, I suppose.
Partially, but they also were there, I feel like personally that we have troops there still because I don't think our government trusts the Germans still. that's not a personal, like, I love Germany and I lived in Germany, but I don't think the US government trusts Germany. So I'm not sure. But let's see, what else was I going to say about this? Oh, I also wanted to just mention briefly that because of September 11th, we've had a whole bunch of government institutions come into being that would have never happened, that we've all kind of just learned to deal with and have accepted. And I had an incident with the TSA recently where I really had to bite my tongue. Otherwise, I definitely would have probably gotten arrested or something. But in effect, my father and I both got through security, but then while we were putting our shoes on, they just randomly demanded, even though we had pre-check, that we had to go back through all of the security again. And I previously, I just gone through the metal detector because with pre-check, that's what part of the perk of it. But then they made me go through the one where I have to put my arms up over my head and be subject to X-rays and all of that. And then I had my necklace on, and that always makes them pat me down. But they saw stuff on my back too, so I was subjected to the most intrusive pat down that I've ever had from the TSA. That was actually just yesterday. And it was all, we found out later that it was all because my father's cowboy hat had some metal pieces on it that got detected, but they didn't try to do additional screening, and they shut down the whole TSA area and paused it, and they had a security breach alert. And so this is just things that only happen to me as I go through my life. But the TSA agent came up to me and said, you're going to have to go back through. And I said, why am I being subjected to this? And he said, ma'am, you're going to have to go back through. And I said, I understand that, but I'm asking you, why am I being subjected to this? And he's like, well, you're with this guy and he breached security. So, and I complied at that point, because I do think that if I had continued to escalate, that I might have gotten arrested. And I was with my father, and I'm not trying to die on that hill in front of my father. But and I didn't want him to have to go through anything negative, just because I am kind of such a libertarian that I actually would kind of fight back on that. But I just think it's 18 years later, and I'm getting fondled at the airport because my dad had some metal on his cowboy hat. And
everybody's okay with it.
Yeah. I mean, most people just go along it's what we have to do. It's just the price to pay to be safe. But the thing is, and I looked this up, a recent study showed that 95% of the contraband that they tried to get through, in the fake study when they were testing,
Correct.
made it through.
Yeah.
So it's not only that they're violating our rights, but they're incompetent as well.
Correct.
And they're costing the taxpayer, again, billions and billions of dollars. And quite frankly, it's not even just that I'm subject to that kind of fondling and, search, but they were all up and it wasn't even just they looked in my bag and were like, okay, you're free to go. They opened my wallet. They were looking at my money. They were looking in the zipper pocket of my wallet. My father is a mathematician. They opened his calculator. They looked inside of the battery pack of his TI-89, and it's we're American citizens. You have no probable cause to detain us or to search us. You certainly don't have a warrant. And we've all just been living with these horrific violations of our Fourth Amendment for 18 years. And I really think we should do something about it, because they're not even competent. So,
well, and I don't want to turn your guys' podcast into, because I'm an anarchist, and that's a bad word amongst a lot of your guys' viewers.
Well, Edgar's views do not reflect those of the trigger warning to a podcast. But I mean, I think that we would probably entertain having anarchist guests on if they wanted to be on our show. So might as well just say what you think.
The reality is, and Full Auto has noted that they've caught 0 terrorists as well.
Yeah, I know, right? Absolute failures.
With all of this, I'm not necessarily, if the founding fathers are truly watching us in one way or another, just to entertain that thought, they would be grossed out.
Oh, they'd be so freaked out.
They'd be so grossed out at how much most of the people who say they love liberty are just like, well, that makes sense. It's okay, no big deal. Background checks, no big deal. It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little fondling at the airport, no big deal. We need to be. Yeah.
It's like, but how are the airplanes going to keep us safe otherwise, or how are the airlines going to keep us safe unless I get fondled and like felt up at the airport?
Gross. I hear this in my classes a lot. People talking about how the Constitution just doesn't essentially matter because it's safety.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just like, wow, that's exactly the problem with all of this.
Mm-hmm. And that's go ahead.
With that overreach. So when people are talking about Beto, I'm not worried about him, to be honest with you, because he can't do anything. He's just one person. Right. I'm more worried about the person after they do pass the laws that are going to be like, well, that's the law now, so we live in we're law-abiding citizens, so we're just going to give them up, and because that makes sense. That's the law now. Mm-hmm. So we have to follow the rules. Our founding fathers would have been like, nah, we're good.
Yeah, they're like, we're going to keep them.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's part of the reason why it actually does scare me. Because what did someone say? I want to know. Some silly stuff in the chat.
Antonia has joined in, which I appreciate.
Antonia,
she's
hello.
She's like, don't do it, Edgar.
Don't do it. Don't do it. But I think that the point that you made was valid in general, and I don't think it was even an anarchist point. But I think, first of all, our founding fathers are rolling in their graves, not just because of the Second Amendment thing, but because of so many issues. But that was one of the most alarming things about my law school experience. I took constitutional law, and that's basically the story of the destruction of the U.S. Constitution, starting at the beginning and getting to the place where it is now, where it's literally, it just means whatever we think it says. It probably definitely doesn't mean what it actually says. And if we think that safety is more important, then that trumps it, even though it's the law of the land. And I saw some crazy statistic that it was like 40% of Americans polled didn't know that the U.S. Constitution was the highest law of the land. They thought it was something else. They thought it was like the statutes that Congress just passed.
State laws?
Yeah, like I think some people said state laws.
That's
it's
crazy.
Like, ooh, face palm. But yeah, I just wanted to, I know I like went on a bit of a tangent about the TSA, but I had that horrible experience recently, and it happened right after the anniversary of 9/11. And I just think as Americans, we need to think seriously about what the benefit of this entity is, and if it's worth having at all. Because I think that I think it's a waste of money. I think that it abuses not just taxpayers' money, but it abuses all American citizens' rights. Because they're supposed to have probable cause before you can have a search or a seizure of a person. And I was searched and I was seized at the airport, even after I had already gone through security and been cleared. And they had no probable cause to do that. They had no grounds to do that. But they just did it anyway. And they keep doing it anyway because the American people have, we've kind of been wusses about this. We've let this happen to us. And I send stuff to my congressman, like asking them to abolish the TSA. But, I'm probably one of the only people who's still actually complaining about this, like vocally in any kind of public way, because it's been 18 years. Like everyone just accepts that this is the way of the world. But I don't think that we can really call ourselves free, or rather that we're subject to the Bill of Rights, like we have the protections of the Bill of Rights, if the Fourth Amendment just means nothing because we're getting on an airplane. But I don't know. Were there anything good in the chat regarding this that I should know?
No. There's a few comments on there, but it's just... Yeah. I think I don't think we have enough time to touch them.
All right. They would get a little bit too crazy.
Yeah, they get yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, people in the chat, feel free to just ask me or Edgar questions about anything we're talking about. I don't know if I said that earlier, but we're here to have some, Q&A as well, because like I said, we don't have our lovely Antonia here to add her commentary as well. So any questions that you have for us, we'd be happy to fill in some time with. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of a big topic, and this is one that I can go on for a long time, so it's probably good that I saved it for last, is Dave Chappelle and his most recent special, Sticks and Stones. And I know that oftentimes our podcast is very much solely focused on
have you watched
Second
Bill
Amendment
Burr's?
stuff. I have not, but I've heard that it's very good and it's on my list.
Yes.
Was it as good as Dave Chappelle's? What do you think?
It's different. So it's always hard to say they're just as good or worse or because they're two different comedians, two different styles.
Yeah.
I enjoy Chappelle's approach better.
Well,
but
I've always loved Dave Chappelle.
Yeah.
He's just cracked me up forever.
Yeah. But Bill Burr's was good too. It's just I don't happen to like his style.
Or his
It's not what he
humor.
says. It's not what he says. It's funny. It's really hilarious stuff. It's just his style is not what I go for.
Right.
Kevin
Well,
Hart's is not what I go for.
Yeah, me neither, if I'm
Yeah.
gonna be honest.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kevin Hart. You seem like a nice guy. But yeah, and I haven't watched Bill Burr just in general.
Yeah.
Like he hasn't. I
Fair
tried
enough.
to. I think I put on one of his specials a few years back on Netflix, but I just wasn't having the laugh coming. But I do want to watch this one because it's gotten the attention about
Correct.
being, at least somewhat anti-politically correct.
Very.
But the first thing I want to talk about with Dave Chappelle before I get into some of the content, because I do want to go over some of the things that he touched on that I think are really important for us to learn as a culture and like really reflect on it. Because I think Dave Chappelle delivered a comic special that was on par with, I don't know, with some of the greats, with Carlin.
Yeah.
And stuff like he was doing political commentary and going across all areas of the spectrum with he was not going to leave anything untouched, especially those things that are most controversial right now.
Correct.
And I just want to talk about the disconnect between how audiences received it and how their critics how they received it, I guess, or what they thought about it. But so I was talking to Edgar about this before, but the audience on Rotten Tomatoes, and I do trust Rotten Tomatoes often for movie reviews, unless they're going to be relatively political movies. But for a long time, I trusted Rotten Tomatoes. But if you go on there and you look up Dave Chappelle Sticks and Stones, you'll find that the critics gave it a 31%. 31. And that actually is... It had been even lower than that. Like, I think some critics came out and were actually like somewhat nice, but I think when it first came out, it was like 14% or something, like with a few critics. It was really low. But then when you look at the audience score, it's a 99%. And quite frankly, I don't know if I've seen anything else on Rotten Tomatoes that has a 99%. I've seen like 98 before 97, but 99% is really hard to maintain, especially from the audience. Because you really have to have almost every single person who goes on there, say that it was good stuff. But it just goes to show, our media and our critics and the entertainment industry really doesn't know what the average person in America enjoys or wants to listen to. Do you have something to say? It looks like you might have something to say.
I always have something to say. That's the problem with number crunchers. That's the problem with critics. That's the problem with they are so self-absorbed. I think of I watched a documentary about Married with Children, and how when they were coming up, they would do test runs and they would do focus groups, and obviously any actor, any producer absolutely hates focus groups because they know they suck. They absolutely suck. They don't really represent an entire nation. Well, every focus group was like, nah, we don't like that show. And I mean, we all know where Married with Children kind of went and how far it went. Well, it was very successful. It lasted 11 years in spite of the focus groups. Had they listened to a small amount of people, it wouldn't have been on the air at all. But same thing with Chappelle is these individuals. I'm trying so hard not to cuss, and it is affecting severely my natural speak because I am like focused on not saying any bad words.
You don't have a switch you can just turn off like me.
Oh man, but it changes my cadence like a lot. Like I'm noticing now I'm self-conscious about it. But anyways,
if you accidentally swear, it's fine. It's really okay.
Right. Everybody says it's fine until it's not fine. I used to be on a radio show, the oldest one in the state of Colorado, and that's what they told me. If you cuss, no big deal. I cussed. I was cut from
never again.
Never again was I invited back.
That's funny.
It's hilarious. But anyways, it's that idea. 10 people do not represent an entire nation.
Right.
And that's the problem. It is same thing with online.
Mm-hmm.
The people that are heavily active in social media don't represent an entire nation. They represent an irrational few that are online.
Mm-hmm. And that goes back a little bit to the whole Robert Francis thing too, because I think the only reason why, well, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why a lot of the Democrats are going for this, like, we're coming for your guns now, is because they've listened to, you know, some crazy people on Twitter who that's really what they want. They want, like, confiscation, or they want, you know, a buyback program, like they have in Australia.
Did you hear what Biden said?
Oh, I'm not sure. No,
90% of Texas gun owners want to ban quote-unquote assault weapons.
Now, was that like a real stat, or was that like Joe Biden having like an elder moment?
That's Uncle Joe being Uncle Joe.
Sorry, I'm gonna get in trouble if I keep making these jokes about politicians with my real name. But yeah, I mean, I think that people, like, the whole focus group thing is a problem, and I think that's why movies have deteriorated so much as well, because they'll end up cutting scenes or editing films based on a small focus group of people, and it's like, what do you guys think about this? But don't trust some random group of people like that. Not to mention that the script will, instead of just being the original writer's focus, will get passed around among several different people who are like, oh no, well, you can't say this because that might offend these people, or oh, maybe you should have a little bit of more of this because that'll help people like it more. And so I just think the artistic vision has gotten kind of bastardized in the entertainment industry, especially with film. I don't know if you agree with
there's
that.
no growth there. One of the shameless plug for my podcast, the Say I Won't podcast, one of the greatest interviews we've had was with Courtney. Now, Courtney is Mile High Gun Girl.
Oh, yeah.
Who was born a male, is now a female. And we had her on the show, and I told her up front, like, I just want to be myself. I don't want to tippy-toe around this subject.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be myself.
And you wouldn't.
No, but I wanted to give her a heads up. Like, I want to be myself. And she's like, yeah, that's what we're here for. So I was able to get as ignorant as I possibly could. And I mean that in the most sincere way. I wanted to be ignorant because we're all ignorant. Basically, I asked her all the questions that we all have after they leave. When somebody who's transsexual or transgender or whatever, we're like...
all the things that all of us really want to ask but feel like we're going to get, like, destroyed for asking.
Correct. So I was like, I just want to ask you everything we all want to know. Like, did you cut it off? How committed are you?
That's the first question.
That was the first question, by the way. Just like that, by the way. Just like that, by the way.
Well, you know.
And fortunately, she was open to it. Not only that, but she threw punches as well. Called us out on some of our stupidity and ignorance, which is exactly the dialogue we need if we're going to move forward from stupid stuff like that.
Right, because all of us are kind of stupid.
Yeah.
So we need the banter.
And when we say that, we're ignorant. We don't, and by ignorant, I mean we don't understand a certain subject. I don't mean that in a negative way. I am ignorant to that. I don't understand why somebody would want to change their gender and fully commit to it. Like, I don't get it. Yeah. But having that conversation allows me to. And as a comedian like Dave Chappelle, when you go on stage and you make jokes about this is a fun way for him to no longer be ignorant about the subject, because we're having a conversation about it. Right. He talks, I didn't see it, but Isaac I say that name and nobody knows who the hell I'm talking about. But he said
It's all right. Isaac's cool.
he watched the last 20 minutes, I guess, and there's a little bit about him telling a story. I don't know if you've seen that story.
Oh yeah, I watched when I found out that there was a special scene at the end, I immediately went back and watched all of it because I just thought I thought that the set was so great that I wasn't going to miss any Q&A afterwards. But yeah, it was incredible. Dave Chappelle talked about how there was a transgender or trans woman who had come to his show in LA, and he was like, man, maybe I shouldn't tell the jokes I'm going to tell about transgender people because I see this person's out here and I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. Like, I'm not trying to hurt feelings with my comedy, but I also don't like to hold my tongue. But what he said, which I thought was really interesting,
and
was,
if he can't say it in front of her
then maybe he shouldn't say it at all. And he's like, I'm gonna say it though, So, and I agree with that. As a comedian, you should. That's the thing. The people who enjoy, or at least in my experience, the people who enjoy the jokes the most are the people who it is actually about.
Correct.
And that's why people like Richard Pryor, I mean, almost his whole set was making fun of his own kind, like making fun of like black people. Like that was Richard Pryor's set, and Richard Pryor was hilarious, and Black people love Richard Pryor. He's a legend comedically in the black community. So, and I agree with him. Like, he couldn't live in fear of telling those jokes just for fear of offending this one particular person. And the thing that the transgender woman said that I thought was really interesting was that, she really appreciated that he told the jokes because they always talk about how jokes about guns or jokes about other things normalize them, and how wonderful would it be if my life and my experience could get normalized with jokes.
Correct.
But I guess it's not allowed to be. And so I think it's important that everything gets joked about because the jokes are what allow us to get through difficult topics. They're what allow us to get past things like racism and other things like that, because we are like, some of the stereotypes like are actually kind of funny, and if we laugh about it, then we won't actually have hatred or build up resentment or anything about these issues.
Here's one thing to consider is that some of the most
put my mic.
some of the most hilarious people out there, and unfortunately we see the effects of it in a negative way sometimes, but some of the people who are the funniest, who are just here on earth to just entertain us fully, are some of the most depressed.
Yeah,
because they need to joke about it in order to feel okay
deal with
about
it.
feel okay about it.
I mean, that's why I make jokes.
You're so depressed.
I have to deal with my own, like issues of sadness and like the fear. Because, I joke a lot about the state of the world, but it's partially because it is kind of freaking scary. And it does help me to deal with it, to laugh about how much we've turned into like a parody or like a clown world at this point.
Yeah.
Because it's so crazy too, because things that were parody on Seinfeld when I was growing up, Seinfeld's my favorite show, so I always end up talking about it. But things that were literally parody on Seinfeld are now real life. They're just things that people genuinely advocate for. I mean, not the majority, but the crazies, the 8% of insane people are in favor of things like, I saw an ad for it was like bras for men, and I was like, oh my god, the manzier, the bro, it's a thing. It's not parody anymore.
No. Somebody asked Fajita, where's my Antonia? Antonia had some car issues, which is much more complex than that, but so that's where she's at.
We would have loved her to be here tonight for sure, and I'm sorry, I miss her too, but I hope that we've still provided some good content for you, Mr. Fajita. Any other comments before I go into more Dave Chappelle? Because I've got plenty to say about Dave Chappelle.
No, we're good.
So I wanted to talk about, because we kind of touched on the transgender issue, but I appreciated first and foremost, how he opened the show. Like, I think we just have to comment on that. How he opened the show, which was by basically saying, like, you know, who does this sound like? It's like, here's something you said 10 years ago, blah, blah, blah. Now I'm going to destroy your life with it and destroy everything you've ever done and ruin your career. Who does that sound like?
And I like how everybody was like, Trump.
Yeah, Trump, right? Which doesn't, I mean, is Trump the one doing those things? I don't know. It was such a strange response, but it just shows how, like, indoctrinated with Trump everyone is. But it's he turns it back and says, no, that's how I see you. That's how I see the audience. That's how I see American culture right now. All of you guys are, you're too focused on, and I think that's why he called it sticks and stones. You know, it's this idea of you're too focused on words being able to hurt you, you know, and words aren't violence. There's a difference. And jokes might be offensive. And quite frankly, it was one of the most offensive sets I've ever seen. But that's why it was so funny. Like, I was in tears, man. It was so hilarious. But I'm so glad that a comedian just basically told his own audience, like, you guys are a bunch of wusses when it comes to comedy. And you're so hard to entertain. You're so hard to make laugh because you're just so fragile.
The worst people to entertain.
Yeah.
Is what he said.
Yeah. And isn't it true? I mean, my goodness, if you can't joke about the most sensitive topics, then it's like how those are the things we need to joke about the most. And that's where the best comedy is. That's when you're throwing your head back and your stomach hurts and you're tearing because you're laughing so hard. It's from the things when we're talking about heavy stuff in comedy.
This is silly, but I see this in my classes because you've been to my class.
Yeah.
I say some pretty
yeah, you do.
I say some pretty crazy stuff, and I always have. And I've never gotten any complaints until maybe a year or two.
Wow.
Before that, everybody was like but as that culture was changing, even in a concealed carry class,
people
you've noticed
to get weird about it.
Yeah. It's strange how even within the so-called conservative side, and there's plenty of people in there that are not necessarily quote unquote conservative, but that's who you would think would be in gun classes. People who would make fun of Kaepernick and call him a snowflake, getting offended, right, over certain stuff, and it's crazy. It's weird.
Yeah, and I do think that there actually is a bit of that "how dare you" on on like both sides of the aisle, because that's the whole idea. Like, someone was saying we need to ban like burning the American flag, you know, because it's like, oh, it would be so offensive to see a flag on fire. But it's like, you know, it's someone's own property. They can do what they want with it. I would never burn an American flag because I actually love America. Yeah. But you know, at the same time, there's people who are like, oh, the American flag is so offensive that, you know, don't you dare put the Betsy Ross flag on a shoe, you know, and then the shoe got pulled. And so, you know, I think our culture is just so pumped for getting outraged at anything. Like, if we can find anything to be triggered by or to be aghast by, we want that, and we
actively
milk it.
Looking for stuff to be offended by.
Right. And I'm so glad Dave Chappelle was willing to call us out and call the American people out on this and be like, listen, I know you guys are my audience, but like, you guys are so easy to offend. You'll get offended by, you're looking to be offended.
And here's the other one that should be applauded, is Netflix.
Yeah, I'm so proud of them for even letting him put that on there.
Well, and then they put him on there and they're like, hey, we're going to put something similar out. Yeah. With Bill Burr.
Right. Yeah, because his was on Netflix too, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
So it's just like, and they're probably going to bring them back and do some stuff instead of canceling, instead of doing all that stuff. They're like, no, we're going to encourage this. Well, hopefully it doesn't change, but it's just we're going to encourage it, because when you have a giant like Netflix saying like, we're not only are we going to show this once, but then we're gonna have somebody else do the exact same thing, basically.
Yeah, in his style.
In his style, yeah. And you guys are gonna love it.
Yeah.
And you guys are gonna pay us for it.
Yeah, and we're gonna pay Dave Chappelle a lot to do it as well. Yeah. But yeah, and there's a few issues too, and I'll get to his comments on guns last. Yeah. I'll save the best for last.
Well, we have a question. It was a little bit back, but kind of on guns.
Okay,
if you're okay with that.
Oh yeah, whatever. Whatever's good.
gun websites, do you think this extreme anti-2A rhetoric will backfire on the Dems after their recent battle to be the most anti-gun? I'll answer that really quick and say that I don't think it's going to backfire. I think, if anything, what they're doing is they're being so extreme that whatever Donald Trump does, they're like, oh, well, it could be worse. And we're seeing that. I see that as somebody who runs Guns for Everyone, a relatively large organization here in the state of Colorado. Anytime we mention Trump taking your guns away, which is true,
Right.
Guns for Everyone is a one-issue group. We don't care about anything else Trump is doing.
Right.
If he's taking our guns away, we're going to call him out on that. When we do that, everybody's like, well, it could be worse. So I think what the Democrats are doing is being so extreme, whether they succeed or don't succeed, they'll make it okay for whatever Republican does, whatever they do, because all they have to say now is, well, it was going to be worse. So they learn how to accept little encroachments. Everybody was okay with Ronald Reagan's encroachments on the Second Amendment in California.
And they were awful.
in California and on a national level when he was president, because it could have been worse. Well, no, that was the worst. So that's what I fear, is they're so anti-gun that they're actually going to be successful in allowing Republicans to be not as anti-gun, but still anti-gun. And everybody, and most of the people that are gun owners are just going to be like, yeah, well, it could be worse.
Yeah, and I think that it'll backfire on them to the extent that they might not get elected because it's not actually a winning position. But I agree that because they've gone so insanely far on that spectrum in terms of like, hell yeah, I'm coming for your AR-15. I mean, how can I just can't even believe a candidate for the president of the United States thought that would be an appropriate thing to say in any way, shape, or form. But because they have gone so far in that direction, I do think that it'll be easier for Trump. He'll be like, listen, I'm not trying to take your AR-15s away, okay?
Just
all I want
suppressors.
is to ban bump stocks and suppressors and make your magazines a little bit smaller, you know? As if that we as like Second Amendment people should be proud of that or happy to support that.
Yeah.
You know, but people will be like, oh well, but Nina, if you don't vote for him, you know,
it's gonna be worse.
It's gonna be worse.
It's gonna be worse.
It's gonna be worse.
And historically speaking, in modern era, it's been the Republican presidents who have taken stuff away from us.
Yeah, at least more recently for sure.
Because Obama didn't take anything away from us. If anything, under his administration, it was bump stocks that were allowed.
Yeah, he didn't do anything about bump stocks.
He didn't do anything about any of that stuff. It wasn't until Trump when they really started getting heavy about that stuff.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing. It's all such reactionary stuff.
Correct.
We had the one shooting in Las Vegas that involved that, and now it's like nationwide. No one's allowed to have a bump stock for any reason. So yeah, I mean, I think it'll backfire in terms of the election for them. But yeah, in terms of the actual moving gun control forward, I do think being that extreme probably benefits them in the long run, just because of how Republicans will react in turn. And with that, maybe I should talk about what Dave Chappelle said about guns, because I did think it was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
He ended up eventually going on a long story about, you know, like an intruder coming into his house and like kind of that's why he might have a rifle or something like that. But he was talking about, one of his statements was, every black American needs to arm themselves. Like, period. Like, he said that, and that wasn't even a joke. You know, he just said that outright. And it was partially because he was talking about, you know, some of the racist issues or some of the things that African Americans have to deal with in this country, living in poverty or living in, you know, I mean, but it was so great though, because he also acknowledged how many white people live in poverty, you know, like he was digging into like everybody. But he acknowledged that if we're going to be, well, he made a joke afterwards saying, that's the only way white people will ban them.
If all the black people.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And again, it's like, he's so hilarious. But you know, the statement that every black American should arm themselves is true. It is true. Historically, if we look at gun control and its origins, you know, and I'm sure Antonia and I have talked about this on the podcast before, the main reason why gun control came into effect at all was after the slaves were freed, after the Civil War and everything. They wanted to make sure that they still could prevent, the recently freed slaves from having firearms, because we really just can't trust them with weapons. They just got free. How are we supposed to how are they supposed to know how to use them, and how can we trust them with them? It's all just a mechanism to continue to, or at that point specifically, to continue to oppress the blacks who had just gained their freedom from slavery. And one thing this is kind of one of my quotes, it's like, free men own guns, slaves don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to give something about that.
Killer Mike, T.I., and Candace Owens were having a conversation.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And it's just on the gun thing.
Yeah.
He was talking about how it's silly how free people are arguing about which master to follow.
Right.
And
especially with the kind of policies these people are talking about. Mm-hmm.
Correct. And a lot of people when they come to the store and talk to me about guns, and sometimes I don't know about what the hell they're talking about, because it's a very niche thing. And I have to kind of remind them, I'm not a gun enthusiast. Mm-hmm. So I although I try my best to keep up with the new technology, because I have to, I see guns as a tool for freedom.
Me too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that's why it's my first issue.
Yeah, it's freedom, and it's self-defense, obviously.
Right.
So I don't look at the coolest lights that are out there and strobies and stuff like that. I'm going to worry more about what happens when the government comes after me. Mm-hmm. Sounds cuckoo. Or when we finally decide that we've had enough. And that's what I'm going to use my firearms for. So, and I think there's too many people out there that just simply forget that that's what it's for. We want to call them sporting rifles, and we want to call them that. It's just no, this is for my freedom. Yeah.
And I think that and that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk specifically about the nature of AR-15s and AK-47s at the beginning of the show, because I think that we've really ceded ground on this argument about weapons of war shouldn't be in the hands of everyday citizens. But the Second Amendment is literally to make sure that weapons of war are in the hands of ordinary citizens, because without the weapons of war, how could we ever hope to defend against a tyrannical government? And the whole point of us fighting a revolution and including the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights was so that we could keep, an onrush of tyranny from coming. And I think it's really important that we don't cede that ground. The whole idea is that citizens have weapons of war such that the government fears the citizens, and it's not that the citizens fear the government. And we have gotten so far away from that. Yeah. It's really, it's kind of sad. And I apologize. Did our stream drop? I hope that...
No, it kind of...
Or did my video feed freeze or something?
It kind of went whack there for a little bit, but I think we're...
Okay. Well, my apologies to you guys for that. But yeah, I really stand by, if the black community is really worried about Trump being a tyrant, and in fairness, I think we should be weary of any president these days, because the office of the presidency is so powerful that we should be wary of anyone who sits in that seat, whether you like them or not. But if the black community is concerned that Trump is a tyrant, or that he's a racist, or that he, some people call him a white nationalist, or all this other mess, if they really believe that, then the first thing you should do is to go arm yourself and learn how to use your weapon properly. Because that is, if there's anything that is going to protect America from some kind of white nationalist uprising, it would be the black community, being armed well enough to protect themselves. Don't rely on the government to protect you. You really don't need to. Just trust yourselves. Trust yourself that you would know how to handle a rifle. Especially these weapons we're talking about, they're light and they're easy to use in terms of once you go and actually train, take some classes, go to the range, learn how to use them. But this is how we protect ourselves from a tyrannical government, is by making sure that we as citizens know how to use the weapons of war that they might try to use against us. Because the truth is, once you disarm the citizenry, and the only people who have weapons of war are the government, what can happen is genocide. And that's usually what happens. And I know that that's a pretty dark thing to say, and it's like kind of a heavy topic, but you know, the cost of we're coming for your AR-15s and AK-47s could potentially be, you know, firing lines. So we need, and think about, you know, these people in Hong Kong, people in Venezuela, people who are fighting against socialist regimes or other tyrannical regimes who want a change. They don't have the weaponry to have a revolution because they all wanted their safety, right? And now they're not safe at all because they don't have any food, and the government is more than willing to like run over some of these people with tanks and, you know, just be horrific to their own citizens.
Yeah, I got nothing. No, I got nothing. I'm
your face looked like you had something.
No.
Any comments that are interesting before I...
There's a lot. I'm having a hard time keeping up with them.
And if people want to do a super chat to make sure I address what you say, feel free.
What's a super chat?
A super chat's like you might pay $1 or $2 and it gets put up to the top of the of the chat stream. Yeah. And for a long time those weren't really an option because it wasn't moving that fast, but if it's moving fast enough where people really want me to comment on something, or Antonia of course when she's here obviously, you know, feel free to do super chats. We're more than willing to entertain those, and if you do a super chat, we will 100% address your comments. But how long have we been streaming? Do I have time for another topic?
You talk as long as you want. Like I'm good. You guys usually go for about an hour. We're at an hour 10.
I've been streaming for an hour 10 already.
Yes.
Wow, apparently I had more to say than I thought. You told me I was going to do this. You're like, it's going to be longer even. Well, thank you so much, audience, for still being with me this long. I do have one last comment about Dave Chappelle, and then I'll go to any audience questions that I have, and then I'll call it a night. But I just wanted to mention his statements on abortion, and I know that this is kind of controversial, and actually even how he did it was like really like oof. Dave Chappelle, because he in effect he said, you know, if you can kill him, I mean I can at least abandon him, you know. So in effect like talking about how he shouldn't have to pay child support or other stuff if they decide to keep the baby, you know. It's like, if you guys have the choice to kill them, then shouldn't I at least have the choice to not finance them? Isn't that not as bad like in the long run? And I just, whatever side of the, you know, abortion argument you're on, I'm pro-life. I view it as a violation. I'm a libertarian. I view it as a violation of the non-aggression principle personally. But I do understand, you know, I have friends who have had abortions, and I certainly am not condemning them for having made the choice that they made. You know, people have been in tough situations, but I think as a culture, we need to do anything we can to try to make abortions happen less. And if that means encouraging people to use better birth control methods so that they don't have as many unwanted pregnancies, or so that we do provide more resources, or like even if people maybe did try like just to be abstinent or something, I don't know. There's a lot of options where we could try to limit the amount of abortions. But I just thought that was such a brilliant way to handle the issue, because he actually didn't really take a side on that, but what he showed was kind of the hypocrisy of those who are really staunchly pro-abortion. Yeah. And I do think that the pro-abortion left, and this is something I think I've said on the podcast before too, but I think there's actually now 3 groups of people in terms of abortion. There's the pro-lifers, there's pro-choicers, and then there's people who are genuinely pro-abortion, who like want more abortions to happen, who think it's a genuine good. They're the ones who think it should be able to happen even after the baby's born or something. It's gross. You know, I know, it sickens me. But I just think that he really showed how it's like, we talk about this as it's a woman's right to make this choice, but where do men have rights as it pertains to their own children, or no? And I think, the way he phrased it was pretty blunt and like kind of like messed up. I guess.
My money, my choice.
Yeah, my money, my choice. Although that's like one of my mottos. That's why I love the whole or that's why I don't like taxes. It's like, that's my money, dude. You can't just take that from me.
Take my money.
Yeah, that's theft, bruh. But really, it's important to point out that we've been focusing so much on like a woman's right to choose, and it's not in the Constitution for one. They want to destroy the Second Amendment, which is just plain as day up in there, but the woman's right to choose isn't, and now that's this kind of golden sacrament or something for them that we can't ever touch. But if we're really going to start talking about who like our rights to choose the fate of our children, or like how much we're going to be involved with our children, I do think it's a pretty good point. It's like, you have the right to end their life, but I don't even have the right to decide what to do with my money as it pertains to them. It's kind of like a mic drop moment.
What did he say? If you can kill him, the least I could do is abandon him.
Yeah. I was laughing so much. He's so funny. And
I mean, not that I agree with abandoning your kids, but
well, of course not. And
there's a
I
point
would
to be
never.
made. There's a point to be made.
Yeah, and I do think that that starts to poke at some of the issues in our legal system as it pertains to like divorce laws and things like that, where in Colorado it's not as bad as some places, but there are some places where it really favors the woman. I mean, it's just extremely favorable to the woman in the divorce, even if the man really is capable of taking care of the kids and wants to take care of them. It can be a mess.
Yeah. So I got a question.
Sure.
If civil war happens between the leftists and the right-wingers, even if unlikely, who would win in your opinion, and what side would libertarians side with, you think?
Ooh, okay. Personally, I think the right would win. Yeah. Probably because we already have more guns.
Yeah.
See, we're not scared of guns.
Here's my problem with that statement. The left shows up. The right doesn't. Have you ever?
That's another problem.
Like compare the weird marches. I
the
think
creepy marches.
The marches and the rallies. Mm-hmm. Go to a 2A rally. You're lucky if you get 1,000 people.
I know, because I went to the one here in Denver when Antonia spoke.
You are lucky, and it's always the same 200 people.
I know.
Because it's usually about 200 people.
Yeah.
Now, you show up to these women marches and free the nipples.
Yeah, put my pussy hat on.
They show up. So, although we have more guns, they would. Now, I'm not saying one's going to win, one's going to lose. I'm just saying look at who actually shows up and who doesn't. Now, the quote-unquote right is like, well, I got a job.
I actually go to work, unlike all these hippies.
Correct.
They say stuff like that.
Well, here's what I would offer. The people that, quote-unquote, don't go to work but show up are going to win the fight potentially because they actually showed up.
Well, because they showed up to the fight.
Correct.
Yeah.
So at some point, you're going to have to decide what's more important, your job or your freedom.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, I wonder to what extent I wouldn't consider myself on the left or the right, to be honest. And I think the libertarians, we're going to be on whatever side is not trying to destroy our liberty. It doesn't really matter which side it is, however that comes to manifest. But right now, the left is going after the guns and the First Amendment, like free speech and stuff like that. So to the extent that we have to choose a side in that, we would probably choose whichever side is pro-free speech, is fighting for, kind of due process generally, fighting for the Second Amendment, fighting for our right to defend ourselves, of course. I shouldn't just say the Second Amendment because it exists with or without that document. But I don't know. I just don't know what it's going to take for the right, the quote unquote right to be up in arms about stuff. I've kind of been up in arms and like shouting into the wilderness since,
but I think
2011.
It's the delusion, though. I think that because here's the thing. Oh boy. Antonia's gonna regret this.
Is it Antonia still watching?
I'm sure she is.
No, I bet she is. We love you, girl. We really do. We love you, Antonia.
Oh lordy. A lot of conservatives are socialist.
Yeah, not all of them, but a lot of them.
Well, here's the thing. They are, because a lot of these people are okay with taxes for something. Mm-hmm. And if we look at what socialist programs are, they are to steal your money for the benefit of the good.
Yeah.
So they are socialists who cannot admit that they are socialists, who will say,
Right.
well, I'm not for welfare. No, but you're still okay with taking my money to pay for your social programs,
Right.
whether I agree with them or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that delusion is that you think you are higher and mightier than the other group, when in reality you're just as hypocritical about them. So I think that's hard, and it's hard to convince him of that, because I'm sure you're going to see it in the chat here in a little bit.
I know, sure, when you turn around and look at it, you're going to have comments.
I'm not socialist. Well, no, it's still, if you're stealing my money to pay for a program that quote unquote is for the better good, then that's still socialism. Whether it seems good or not, it's paying for people's food seems like a good thing, but that should come out of the goodness of my heart. Security should come out from me willing to pay for security.
Yeah.
Or not pay for security, or roads, or schools, or whatever.
My roads. Sorry.
Because schools are social programs.
Yeah.
It's a
yeah.
socialist thing. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. So the reason I bring this up is the left already knows who they are.
Right.
I think the conservatives for a very long time have been very, very confused, and quote unquote conservatives, because I don't think anybody knows what the hell that even means anymore.
I know, it's all of these terms have kind of gotten
Correct.
messed up. Yeah.
So it's just, I think they're still trying to figure out who they really are, because they say low taxes, but they say no socialism, but they love socialism.
And then they say, I love capitalism, but we need to regulate big corporations.
Correct. Yeah, I love the free market, but
Yeah, I love the free market unless a company gets big enough.
correct. Yeah. So there's a lot more confusion there.
Right.
That there's still a lot more infighting within the quote unquote conservatives, and the left already knows who the hell they are, and they're just being more vocal about it.
Yeah, and I worry that the left I worry that liberals, like genuine liberals, who I actually have a lot of agreement with, genuine liberals are going to fall in line with insane leftists and be on that. You know, like you ask, like, where will the libertarians be? It's like, the libertarians will probably go with whoever is supporting gun rights and free speech. But the liberals will probably go on whatever is, pitched as the most, I don't know, not the most woke, but whatever can be painted as like, this is the most compassionate thing, as if compassion is like the only thing that the government should be worried about, or as if compassion is like something the government's even capable of.
Yeah. Prescott Caliber Club says, I'm not sure we have much of a chance when it comes to the 2A. We needed to be up in arms for the past 80 years. Most people seem to value a dollar over their government recognized human rights. Yeah,
preach, brother. I know. I've been, I'm not old enough to have been up in arms for 80 years, but I certainly think that, we should have been much more up in arms, like when the New Deal happened. And ever since then, we really have been, we've been letting liberty just slide and slide. And again, that's one of the reasons why I do talk about the TSA, because I just think it's like the ultimate symbol of how we just don't give a crap what happens to our rights, and we're just going through the motions now.
Yeah.
And I when I first kind of went down the rabbit hole of like kind of understanding that all of my dreams of how incredibly free this country was like weren't actually that true, and although I will say, I'm going to preface that by saying I still would rather live here than like anywhere else in the world for the most part. Like, yeah. I'm not really sure. I don't think I could say that there's a freer country than here. But with that said, we're not even close to as free as we used to be. I mean, and I never want to talk about going backwards, because freedom is not an old idea. It is still so new. Like the American experiment is only like a couple hundred years old, and people talk about like, that's the ancient times. It's like, no, all this crap where you have the government mandating and dictating how everything happens in an economy, that's old. That's what's been happening for thousands of years, is having like a monarchy or an oligarchy controlling the entire economy with a stroke of a pen however they want it. And in effect, people are almost asking for that now. I mean, you heard that audience cheer Robert Francis over that. Like they're like, take our rights away, take it away. We can't handle having liberty. But we don't have to go back. We need to go forward. We need to go forward with the new idea of liberty because, yeah, we tried this experiment out and we took some turns that were like kind of messed up and we're really not on the right track liberty-wise.
Well, but then how do you convince the people to appreciate the chaos that comes with freedom? And I think that's the hard thing is that there's a lot of chaotic, I'm going to cuss. There's a lot of chaotic, fucked up shit that comes with freedom. There's a lot of stuff in freedom that makes me uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable the thought of, because we see this a little bit. We see a lot of people, if you go downtown, you might experience somebody doing heroin. You're probably gonna.
I saw that when I lived downtown.
You're probably gonna see needles.
Mm-hmm.
You might see somebody frozen to death. Yeah. Like how do you say, hey, freedom is great when all at the same time that comes with the freedom? And for me, it's just like, listen, I'd much rather have to live with that and have the opportunity for me to change it than to live in this quote unquote peaceful slavery where I don't have the opportunity to change it.
Right. And the thing is, and what I've been trying to do with some people who I just think genuinely don't value liberty. When I talk to them, what I try to say is like, listen, I understand there's scary aspects of freedom. And there's going to be some times where certain people get hurt because someone did something irresponsible with something. You know, it's the same thing. We talk about firearms. Like some people are going to commit crimes with guns or with knives or with cars or whatever. But the alternative is so much more frightening and violent. Yeah. It is so much more frightening and violent. Like to have an all-powerful government that can just that is the only one who has the weapons and is the only one who gets to decide what's allowed to be said in public opinion or thought in your mind. I mean, we almost live kind of in an Orwellian situation, and people seem to be kind of okay with it. But to me, it's just terrifying. Like the scary part of freedom is so much less scary to me than the scary part of a tyrannical government, or even the potential for a tyrannical government. Because like I've been learning about Mao and some other stuff because the New York Times, they published something kind of positive about Mao, and I was like, I don't know enough about him. I'm going to go down that rabbit hole. But the alternative, especially in this day and age with the kind of weaponry and like power and might that the governments have, the alternative to us not being armed and to us not fighting for liberty is just a kind of tyrannical, like almost dictatorship type situation that is just so much more nightmarish to me than being free. And I understand like being free is scary, and even me right now saying this online, it's like this in our country, this is almost dangerous for me to be talking like this. But I am so much more scared of what happens if I don't get these ideas out and if I don't help people understand the values of liberty and like the values of your right to bear arms. I don't know if you have something.
I don't.
Or if the chat looks like something's happening, but
it's going.
But in any event, that's kind of a good place to end, I think, because because I do think it's a good point, and I encourage anyone who's listening to this, like anyone that you can help spread the message of liberty to, and just help them appreciate what liberty means and why it's important, and historically why it's important. That's why I do this. That's why I take away time from my fiance and time from whatever I would just be lounging at home doing, is because liberty is so important. And the alternative, if we lose the Second Amendment, so to speak, in terms of like if we lose our right to bear arms, if we lose our right to free speech in this country, I mean, that is just a nightmare that I am not willing to entertain. And so that's why I'm up on here talking about these issues. And I'm sure Antonia would agree with me that that's why we fight these battles every day. So I just want to thank my audience so much for tuning in and listening to me talk about these issues, because it's you guys who can go out and spread these ideas onto other people, and hopefully we can spread the brush fires of liberty, as they say, like throughout men. And I also just really want to thank Edgar, of course, and Guns for Everyone for sponsoring this podcast. They really, Edgar and everyone at Guns for Everyone are what makes this podcast possible, and why we can be in such a nice studio and have such nice audio and do these live streams in the professional manner that we do. So I just want to thank Edgar for everything he does and everything that Guns for Everyone does. And if you're in Colorado and you want to get a concealed carry permit, please look into Guns for Everyone's website, because they have free concealed carry classes all the time. And is there anything else you want to say, Edgar, before I do my final closeout here?
No. Thanks for allowing me to speak this time.
You can always talk, Edgar, but especially if it's just me or Antonia, we'll always welcome you to be our kind of co-host extraordinaire for the day. But if you guys want to be patrons, you can go to patreon.com/triggerwarning2A and become a patron there. Every dollar helps us make this podcast better. So if you want to donate that way, please do. But more importantly, if you liked this live stream, if you liked the content or any of the content that we put out with our podcast, please just share it with anyone that you think would want to listen. Because like I said, it's really spreading the message of liberty that I and Antonia, I'm sure too, care about most. We want to spread the message of protecting our right to bear arms as far as wide as we can. So please share this if you liked it, and we'll be here next Monday too with a great guest. So please don't miss it. But thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday. Bye.